What is up, Flick fans, and welcome back to my channel. In honor of, we don't really have a reason to be doing this, but I woke up this morning and I said, you know what I want to do today? I want to make a Batman villain tier list. That's right, all of the live-action villains we have ever seen either square up against Batman or be in one of his individual films. And when I say individual films, I mean I'm actually not going to include the Jared Leto version of the Joker, a few characters from the Suicide Squad, because they weren't technically in any of the movies where Batman was the antagonist. Sure, he made a cameo in the Suicide Squad, but it wasn't enough for me to fairly represent the tension between they and Batman and just judge them as an overall villainous presence towards Batman. And they weren't included on the template that I'm using, so that's what we're doing today. We are talking about all of the movies, starting with the Tim Burton Batman film, all the way up to Christopher Nolan's final film, The Dark Knight Rises. I'm excited to do this, and if you're asking, Austin, why didn't you wait until Joaquin Phoenix's Joker? Well, I have a few other tier lists in mind for that, and I don't think he's actually going to be squaring up against Batman. As far as I know, I haven't seen the movie. All right, let's get into this list, and of course, I need your comments down below. Who's your favorite? Who's your least favorite? A lot of this is going to have to do with when you grew up, what Batman movies mean the most to you, because I know plenty of people that would put certain characters from the older Batman films a lot higher on this list, but I was growing up in the 2000s, so of course the Dark Knight trilogy, it means a bit more to me, but this is all opinion-based. It's my favorite, it's my least favorite. I'm not saying they're the strongest, I'm not saying they're the ones that could easily take Batman down the most. These are my favorite, and I appreciate you guys watching this video. Like I said, we're gonna get into this. We're gonna start at a random spot. Let's start with Ben Mendelsohn's Daggett, I believe that was his name, in The Dark Knight Rises, and Ben Mendelsohn is one of the best actors working today, in my opinion, and every time he plays a villain, I'm like, yep, that's right, that fits. But the first time I saw him do that on the big screen was Daggett. At the time, I didn't know this guy was going to go on to become one of my favorite actors working in Hollywood today. His character, it was okay. Of course, as a top-notch actor, he's going to measure up on those terms, but his character didn't have the presence, and it really didn't have the threatening demeanor that I wanted him to have when they first started setting him up at the beginning of the movie. He still got things done, and he set things up for Bane to come in and really cause a bit of chaos, but I'm going to start out placing his character on the okay tier. Not to say he's a bad villain once again, but when you're squaring up against some of the best players in the Dark Knight, the Batman universe, having a villainous presence, it's hard to be more than okay if you didn't do much in the movie, and he did quite a bit until Bane takes him out later on in the film. Next up, Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman. Now, I'm a bit more divided on Batman Returns than some people. I think it's an okay movie, but I need to go back and see it because it's been so long since I watched it. And the last time I watched it, really, I was a bit younger, and the movie just kind of freaks me out. The first Tim Burton Batman film, it doesn't freak me out. I'm like, ah, that's Batman. Batman going up against the Joker. This one got dark. This one got intense. But it was also a bit too much for me at times. But what I just said does not fall on Michelle Pfeiffer's shoulders. Michelle Pfeiffer gives a fantastic performance in this movie. She works off the script like she has to, but she really takes it into her own hands and does something that we had never seen prior, and it really fulfilled people's fantasies of seeing Catwoman on the big screen. They never thought she could be portrayed in this light. She was crazy, she was wacky when she had to be, but she was also perfectly suited to play this character. She was seductive towards Batman, but she was also a threat. She was very threatening, and I really did. I loved her performance in this movie. I'm going to go ahead and place Catwoman on the great tier, and a lot of people would put her on the awesome tier, and honestly, I don't blame you. To me, she is a great villain and a great villainous presence in that movie, and a bit of an anti-hero as well, and that's all of the things that we need from Catwoman, and that's why to me she's on the great tier. Next up, it's the master of puns, the master of ice puns. He comes in, he tries his best. Listen, Arnold, he's not a bad actor. Clearly, he's one of the best action stars of the 90s, and he's still working today, and he has been great as of late in certain more low-budget films, but coming in as this character, it comes down to the way he was written. Joel Schumacher, I don't think he knew what he was doing with these movies. He took the character of Batman and then placed that character and all of his supporting characters in this wacky world that, you know, maybe as a 5-year-old I was on board with, because that's when this movie came out and I grew up with it, and I'm like, oh, this is fun. And then I grow up and I get older and my brain starts to develop and I realize, oh, that movie's not good. And it's not just not good, it's really, really bad. Now, I'm saving the awful tier for characters that I truly believe are disgraceful to Batman. Don't get me wrong, I do believe Mr. Freeze was disgraceful, but there's something about the line delivery and just his presence in the movie that's slightly entertaining. It's over the top, absolutely. But for me, I'm like, yeah, you know what? He was having fun with the character. I think he knew what movie he was in. Doesn't change the fact that he's a bad character, a really bad villain, almost on that awful tier, but once again, I have to save that. Mr. Freeze was a big letdown, and I would love to see what they can do with that character now, because he really is an intense villain in the Batman comics and in the Arkham Asylum games. Awesome in those games. Also, if you haven't seen Batman Sub-Zero, I believe is the title, it's an animated movie from the 90s, go check that out. That is one of the better Batman animated movies I've ever seen. It really shows me that Mr. Freeze can be something more than what he was in this movie. Next up, Jack Nicholson as the Joker. And I said I grew up with the 2000s Dark Knight movies, if you will. But I also grew up with this movie on VHS, and I loved Jack Nicholson as the Joker. A different portrayal. Now, he is comic accurate, absolutely. But Jack Nicholson really took this role, and he made it his own. He put his own touch on the character of the Joker, and that's what I really enjoyed about his interpretation. It does feel very Tim Burton-esque, kind of like a Catwoman, but it works. It works for the tone, it works for a villainous presence, which he is, and I know I keep saying that for all of these characters, but if they can master that and then bring the comic book parts that we know about them as characters, that's what I love, and that's why Jack Nicholson as the Joker gets on that great tier for me. He really is. He's a great Batman villain. Not my favorite interpretation of the Joker. I think he was outdone, outclassed, but a lot of people will hear that and they'll be like, well, I'm turning off this video because that's ridiculous. It all comes down to nostalgia, what you grew up with, and frankly, which taste you have. Do you have a darker, more intense taste, or do you have more of a lighthearted, but still carries that darkness that the Joker needs taste? And I think Jack Nicholson really is great as the Joker. You know who else I think is great? Cillian Murphy as Scarecrow in Batman Begins. I think this guy comes in, you don't know that much about him, but you know enough about the Scarecrow, and at this point you kind of know enough about him as an actor. I mean, he wasn't as big as he is now. Now, he's still not an A-list actor. In terms of talent, I think he is. He does pop up everywhere, but people don't know his name as much as they know these other names. But he truly did embody what it means to be the Scarecrow. He was this psychotic doctor who came in and really implanted himself and sustained himself all throughout the franchise as this villainous presence. He even pops up in The Dark Knight Rises as the judge, and I'm like, that's perfect. That's exactly what he needs to do right here. I think the Scarecrow is one of those villains that people may forget about more often than the other names on this list, but for me, he comes into Batman Begins and does what he needs to do to make this one of my favorite Batman movies of all time, and I love him as an actor now, and I love looking back upon him and seeing how big of an impact he had on Bruce Wayne at the time. The scene when he falls out the window and he's on fire, I'm like, Scarecrow is here, and he's here to stay. Next up, this is interesting. This is Christopher Walken. That was really bad. He played the character of Max Schreck in Batman Returns, and not a very memorable villain. And don't get me wrong, he is a villain in this movie. You can tell from the second he pops up on screen, he was a bit too wacky. He brought in what I was afraid some characters were going to bring in this movie. Tim Burton, I think, felt more comfortable in this film to do what he does in his movies, and a lot of the times that works. Like I was saying earlier, in Batman Begins, it just becomes a bit too much for me, and Christopher Walken was the embodiment of that wackiness in this movie. He was dark, absolutely, but he's not a villain people look back on and they remember. He's not as bad as a Mr. Freeze because, once again, I remember Mr. Freeze as being this bad villain. I don't even really remember Christopher Walken's character, and that's why at the end of the day, he didn't do enough to make me look back and be angry at his presence, but he's kind of meh, he's forgettable, and he's there. We move on to Anne Hathaway's version of Catwoman, if you will, and this is one that a lot of people have issues with in the New Age trilogy, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're comparing her to Michelle Pfeiffer, and frankly, that's not fair. It's kind of like Heath Ledger as the Joker. Every Joker that comes out after Heath Ledger, people are going to compare to Heath Ledger, just because that's what happens when you have a monumental performance like that. And I would say Michelle Pfeiffer, not as great in my opinion, she's great, but not as great as Heath Ledger in my opinion, but you still have that marquee Catwoman performance. Can anyone ever outdo that? Well, in my opinion, while Anne Hathaway did not outdo that, I still thought she was good in the movie. I'm sorry, I know a lot of people feel the opposite way, but I am actually a fan of The Dark Knight Rises. Gets a little wacky towards the end, but I do defend that movie more often than not, and I think Anne Hathaway did exactly what she needed to do in this film. She was seductive, she had the elements of Catwoman that we love, but she also had this emotional layer to her that Nolan managed to flesh out more than I thought they would, I'll say that. Didn't get her to the point of being great because I did need a bit more from her performance, but I still think her version of Catwoman is good, and I defend it all the time, so I'm placing her on the good tier. And we move on to, yeah, do I need to say much about this version of Bane? I said I was saving the awful tier. And the awful tier for me is just a tier so bad, so atrocious, not even like, oh, I can laugh at that because it's bad yet it's funny like Mr. Freeze. More like, I'm offended at what they did here. And this version of Bane, I mean, he was mindless, he was a dummy, they didn't give him one line of dialogue. They completely took the character of Bane, what he is in the comics, especially what he has been more recently. I know that's after the movie came out, but Bane is more than this. This is gross, this is disgusting, this is one of the reasons why this movie is so bad. One of the many reasons, but this is probably the main reason for me. You take a villain as important to the Batman lore, and you make him an idiot. And he can't speak, he can't talk, it's just everything. It's like when they sewed Deadpool's mouth shut in X-Men Origins Wolverine. You don't do that to that character. You don't do this to Bane. And it was atrocious. On the awful tier. No one can convince me otherwise because this was just disgusting. Next up is Uma Thurman as Poison Ivy, and shocking that I would be saying Uma Thurman as Poison Ivy because, you know, at the time, she seemed perfect for Poison Ivy. Then you get Joel Schumacher directing, and she ends up being on the bad tier. She was entertaining, I'll say that, and she did have the way that she pronounced things, but it started to become more annoying as the movie progressed, and it turned into a caricature of what I think I think she thinks Poison Ivy should have been. And once again, I don't blame Uma Thurman as an actress. We know she's great. We know she's great. Kill Bill, anything Tarantino related, honestly, but she has done it over and over. This is one of those mistakes in a career that you look back on and you just say, I wish I could have done better. I wish I could have made a different decision. Now, she does add to what this character otherwise could have been. It could have been on the Bane level of awful. I still think it's bad, but Uma Thurman as an actress just gets it a step above that. But I still can't get it over that. I know some defend her as being, oh, she was entertaining, and I'll give you that, but no, not for me. And this is the one I've been sitting back debating for the last few minutes. Should I put the Penguin on the good tier or the great tier? And here's what I believe about this entire character. I think the writing for his character, it was a bit of a miss for me. He gets a bit too far over the top, but then you look at the casting of Danny DeVito and how perfect he is as the Penguin, and it's not a missed opportunity because he did deliver. His performance is exactly, and I'm not kidding, exactly what the Penguin, I think I'm talking myself up right now, was at the time, and he really embodied what the Penguin meant from the comic books. And even though I don't love Batman Returns, I know a lot of people do, I do think it was perfect casting as the Penguin. Once again, I need to go back and watch this movie, and I had him on the good tier, but I'm talking myself. Just look at that. He is the Penguin. He's the perfect size. He's the perfect shape. He is the perfect actor to embody. He even sounds exactly what I thought the Penguin would sound like. That's it. I've talked myself up. I'm putting the Penguin on the great tier, and I know it just seems like, oh, clearly he's obsessed with the Batman villains, but how could you not? Look at Danny DeVito as the Penguin. That is the Penguin from the comic books, and he acts exactly how you would think the Penguin would act. Now, it's a bit over the top for me, and I do think the writing goes in certain directions towards the end where I'm like, I don't know if I would have done that myself. I don't know if I was on board with that, but we're talking about the character and his impact on many as the Penguin, and I just don't think it can get better as that casting. Now, we know we're getting a Penguin in the new Batman movie coming out, and I may actually update this tier list at that point, but I am excited to see if they can top this because, wow, can't believe I talked myself up. Next up is Qin Han as the character of Lao in The Dark Knight. Now, this character, I think, was intended to have a bigger presence. I think Nolan wanted us to feel like he was more important to this story, but when I look at The Dark Knight, one of my favorite movies of all time, I don't think about his character. I watch the movie, and I watch it again and again and again, and I see him pop up, and every time I see him pop up, I'm like, oh yeah, he's in this movie. And that's not good after you've watched a movie like 15 times, and I'm not saying he's a bad character. I'm just saying the presence that he had. And Joker even says it when he walks in. He's like, you gonna listen to the guy on the TV screen? He's a little wimp. And then Batman literally goes to where he is and gets him. And there isn't much more to his story than that. So as a villainous presence against Batman, I don't think he did that much. As a character in this movie, I don't think he did that much. I think this actor is great. And whenever he is on screen, I'm like, yeah, he's great, but he didn't have much to do. And I was originally going to put him on the okay tier, but I'm just going to say he's meh. He's not bad. He's not bad in the least bit, but I don't remember him as a presence. I don't remember him as a threat to Batman because, frankly, other than having to travel all of those miles, Batman got him pretty easily. It was a lot easier done than said, I guess. Does that make sense? Not really. We're going to move on to Jim Carrey as the Riddler. Now, here's the one where people are like, yep, I'm tuning out. I have a bit of a soft spot for this character because, one, it's one of those, and once again, I know, but I did grow up with this as I grew up with Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy. Not very good. But Jim Carrey is one of my favorite actors of all time. He truly is. He's one of those where I go back to his old movies and I think he's great. As this character, as the Riddler, I honestly think he did what he needed to do. Now, was the script very good? No. Is the movie itself good? Not really. But his presence in this film is enough for me. And I go back and even today, I watch him in this movie and I'm like, he's funny. It's weird, it's over the top, it doesn't fit what Batman is, but imagine Jim Carrey now playing an older, more grizzled Riddler, a Riddler that isn't over the top, a different character from what he played, but I imagine Jim Carrey playing like a Nolan, or even a Matt Reeves, the Batman that's coming out, an old Riddler. That just kind of blows my mind thinking, because Jim Carrey is a really good actor. You don't see it in this performance, but I did have a bit of fun with it, and that's why I'm putting the Riddler on the okay tier. I can't quite get him higher just because I think the movie is so bad. But Jim Carrey's performance is not the big flaw for me in this film. Next up, we have the character of Miranda. You know what? Let's just call her what she really is. She's the daughter of Ra's al Ghul, how the lady says it in Batman Begins. I know a lot of people say Ra's al Ghul, but they kind of call him Ra's al Ghul in this movie. Listen, I am a fan of Marion Cotillard as an actress. I mean, she is phenomenal, and whenever she's in a movie, Inception especially, her performance in that film is great, and her performance in this film is good. Her performance and her character is integral to the plot, and she does get to Batman when she stabs him, so she does all of the things that makes her a good villain, so I should put her on the good tier, right? Well, you get to the end, and certain elements of that performance and the twist was kind of predictable to me, and her death, it's still one of those death scenes I go back and I watch, and I'm like, that's just too far over the top, because she's laying there and she goes, it felt off to me, and I don't think she was the presence that Nolan intended on her being. As an actress, she's great, her story overall is a nice arc, and she was threatening to Batman, and because of that, I'm going to put her on the okay tier. I want to get her to good, but I just can't quite get her there. And that's the way it goes. So next up we have Bane, and Tom Hardy as Bane. Hello! I'm going to kill the Batman! Listen, I know a lot of people have issues with the fact that you can kind of make out what he's saying, but not really at times. I think you can, but you go back and you listen to a few scenes, and I'm like, yeah, I get what people are saying. I get their critique. Otherwise, you know, I keep saying this, I'm a defender of this character. I'm a defender of Tom Hardy as Bane. When I first saw this movie, growing up with these films, I wanted an epic conclusion. I wanted an epic payoff. And honestly, this was before I started critiquing filmmaking as hard as I am now. So I did enjoy The Dark Knight Rises more than I do now. I still enjoy the movie, but I do see some obvious flaws. One flaw that I still haven't come around on, and I hear people talk about it all the time, how Bane, Tom Hardy is Bane, he was just too much, he was overrated, he's over the top, you can't understand what he's saying. I get the critique. I get it. But for me, I think Bane is awesome. I think he's awesome. His presence, he broke the Batman. I mean, when you're doing this, you have to look at performance. Yes, you have to look at writing, absolutely. But you also have to look at his impact on Batman. And I see all of these villains on the great tier. Catwoman gets into Batman's head and makes him kind of fall in love. Joker does what he does at the end of that movie, and it was incredible. The Scarecrow, I mean, when Batman, like I said, falls out the window, he's on fire. A great villain. The Penguin, I mean, he basically takes over the town, and he causes Batman to do all kinds of things in that movie. Everything I just said embodies a great villainous presence. In my opinion, what Bane did in this movie is just awesome. And I mean awesome. I love everything about his performance. I put him up there as one of the coolest Batman villains of all time. The fact that he can fight and take on Batman physically is something. The fact that you have Tom Hardy, and before really everyone knew who Tom Hardy was, I mean, I was kind of coming around on him as an actor, but now he is Tom Hardy. You know, this character is truly one of the more iconic Batman characters, in my opinion, villainous characters. And he's one of the reasons why The Dark Knight Rises means so much to me. I love his performance as Bane. I really do. Next up, we have Aaron Eckhart as Two-Face. A Two-Face performance that some people would say is the weakest part of The Dark Knight. I have to disagree. I think his turn as Two-Face is one of the more fleshed out things I have seen in a movie, in any superhero film of all time. You start out, and he says it at the beginning of the movie. He basically lays out his future. You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And we all knew it was coming, but we didn't know it was going to be this heartbreaking. And this is one of those storylines for me that I am just on board with from the second it starts. The night is darkest before the dawn, and the dawn is coming. So many iconic lines from his character, and the guy is a good actor. I think he's an underrated actor because, you know, he hasn't really popped since this film, and I wish he could have selected better roles. I wish he could have been on board for better roles. Overall, Aaron Eckhart's Two-Face is so memorable in this movie for me. Sure, the ending was a little rushed, and he didn't get a chance to be the Two-Face that we want him to be, and he died a bit quick. Those are really the only flaws that I have with his character, and maybe a little biased because, once again, nostalgia, but I think he's great. I truly think he's great. Now, this one's difficult for me because I was debating between the great and the awesome tier for Liam Neeson's Ra's al Ghul. You know, I think he is one of the better actors of our generation. I think he is perfect for this role. He doesn't quite have the impact that Bane has for me. But in my opinion, his presence feels a bit more grand scale than some of the characters, well, most of the characters on the great tier, because he starts out and then you get that turn and Batman Begins and you're like, whoa, that's the guy. That's the guy who trained Batman, and he ends up being the character of Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul. And that turn really worked for me. And at the end of that movie, he does threaten the entire city. He does do what Bane almost did as well in The Dark Knight Rises. He almost took down Gotham. And that, to me, everything, all of those aspects with the actor of Liam Neeson, that qualifies to be on the awesome tier. I don't think he's as awesome as Bane, but I'm still going to put him up there because he did start everything on the perfect note as kind of like the Palpatine to Scarecrow's Darth Vader. He was the guy pulling all of the strings, and it worked out really well. And then he comes back in The Dark Knight Rises. Well, his entity comes back, and he's still haunting Bruce Wayne. All of these years, he is still haunting the character of the Batman. And for me, that all qualifies for him to be an awesome villain. Next up is Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face. You know, I wanted more from this. It's Tommy Lee Jones. This character should not have been over the top. That's just the way I look at this. He's a great actor. But imagine the Tommy Lee Jones that we're used to, the one that we're accustomed to, the one that doesn't care about anything, and he's a bit darker. Well, in real life, when he's in interviews, he's a rough person to deal with. He's a great actor. But imagine that version of Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face. All right, more threatening. This Two-Face is not threatening. And whereas Jim Carrey, you expect something like that from Jim Carrey as the Riddler, and you understand why he is the way that he is, a bit more kooky, a bit more on edge. You get Tommy Lee Jones, it's like, that's less Two-Face than the Riddler is over the top. I think Two-Face should have been more down to earth. And because of that, you know, I'm not going to sit back and say that he's bad or awful because of the acting talent of Two-Face and how Schumacher slightly refrained himself compared to his next movie in Batman and Robin. Still going to say he's meh because I watched the film and I'm like, yeah, the movie's not good. But his performance is not one that sticks out as horrible or bad. But it is meh because it's not good and it's not even okay. You know, I think a lot of people would put him on the bad or the awful tier. I'm not going to quite get him there. It's a very close race, but I am going to place him on the meh tier because, you know, not one I often go back to. Then we come to Falcone, and Falcone is, first of all, the performance is really, really good in Batman Begins. That conversation with Bruce, when Bruce gets dragged out of there, I'm like, dang, this guy is a crime boss. I don't know why Maroni's not on this list, not on the template from The Dark Knight. I think both of them have great performances. They are the crime boss of crime bosses. They're kind of ruling the city. And because of that presence alone, I have to put him on the okay tier. Austin, only on the okay tier? Why not put him on the good tier? Well, you know, he didn't have much to do in terms of Batman coming in. He wasn't this presence to Batman compared to how he was for Bruce Wayne. He was a great villain towards Bruce Wayne. That one conversation gets him to the okay tier. And just his performance is good. And then he goes in and Scarecrow puts him in the crazy house. And he doesn't have much more to do after that. That's why I'm not going to put him on the good tier. But I still liked him. He and Maroni, for me, would both be on the okay tier, even though Maroni is, once again, not on this list. But you know who is on this list? My favorite, one of my favorite villainous performances of all time. Possibly my favorite. That's a tier list for another day. But I think Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker is just head and shoulders above everyone else. Now, when you get to the awesome tier, I wouldn't say head and shoulders, but I would still say maybe head. I am going to put the Joker on the all-time tier because, to me, he is just an all-time villain. He is, and there's no denying that at this point. I don't even know if I've heard anyone coming in and saying Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker is overrated, because how do you say that? How do you get there? What he did at the time, and Oscar's one thing, winning the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Yeah, it's grand scale, but I don't even care about awards recognition. I just care about his impact on the movie. And the only issue I think people have is the fact that he steals the show from Batman. It's a movie called The Dark Knight, and people remember his performance than they do more Bruce. Now, I still think Christian Bale's performance as Bruce is magnificent. I do. But in my opinion, he does steal the movie because he does everything you need to do as a Batman villain. Then he goes one step above that, and he causes this wind of chaos all throughout Gotham. But you go deep into his character, and you realize that this guy doesn't have a plan. I don't have plans. I mean, it's scary because it's the most realistic thing I've ever seen in a Batman movie. This is a maniac, a psychopath that could exist in the real world. I mean, most of these could, the ones without superpowers, but this one is the most realistic to me. And then we go to, I think, the scene that is the most iconic scene in Batman history at this point, and it's the conversation between he and Batman in the cell, and it does everything you need to do. It gives us everything we've wanted to see between Batman and the Joker. It is a different relationship than what we're used to in the comic books. It is portrayed a bit more realistic, a bit more grizzled, a bit more down to earth. All of those things for me work so well in The Dark Knight, and I don't think I need to say much more. His poster's on the wall, but you can't see it because the camera's not facing it. Listen, I love the Joker. Frankly, any character on the okay or above, I like or love. But these top three tiers for me, man, they are the iconic Batman villains. Now, I know and I recognize and I realize, I see the comments, a lot of people are going to change this up. You're going to place some people on the awesome tier, some people on the great tier, maybe a few more people on the all-time tier, but here's how it goes. This is all opinion-based. Nothing here is factual. This is just how I feel about these characters. But what I love doing, I love seeing, I love reading, I love seeing your comments down below. Which characters would you place on the awesome, the great tier, and which ones do you think are awful, bad, meh, or okay? Guys, this was so much fun. It's kind of therapeutic talking about the Batman villains because I've never been able to do that on this channel. I appreciate you watching this video. So much fun to do, so much fun to talk about. And don't worry, when Joaquin Phoenix's movie comes out, we'll be doing more tier lists, different tier lists, but tier lists nonetheless. You guys are the very best. I believe my next video is a Blinded by the Light movie review, and I'll see you very soon.